The founding of Liberia in the early 1800s was motivated by the domestic politics of slavery and race in the United States as well as by U.S. foreign policy interests. In 1816, a group of white Americans founded the American Colonization Society, ACS, to deal with the problem of the growing number of free blacks in the United States by resettling them in Africa. The resulting state of Liberia would become the second, after Haiti, black republic in the world at that time. Prominent Americans such as Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John Randolph were among the best-known members of ACS. Former President Thomas Jefferson publicly supported the organization's goals, and President James Madison arranged public funding for the society. The motives for joining the society were vast, as a range of people from abolitionists to slaveholders counted themselves member. On the other hand, many abolitionists, both black and white, ultimately rejected the notion that it was impossible for the races to integrate and therefore did not support the idea of an African American colony in Africa. Still, the ACS had powerful support and its colonization project gained momentum. In 1818 the society sent 2 representatives to West Africa to find a suitable location for the colony, but they were unable to persuade local tribal leaders to sell any territory. In 1820, 88 free black settlers and 3 society members sailed for Sierra Leone. Before departing they had signed a constitution requiring that an agent of the society administer the settlement under U.S. laws. They found shelter on Scribo Island off the west coast of Africa, but many died from malaria. In 1821, a U.S. Navy vessel resumed the search for a place of permanent settlement in what is now Liberia. Once again the local leaders resisted American attempts to purchase land. This time, the Navy officer in charge, Lieutenant Robert Stockton, coerced a local ruler to sell a strip of land to the society. The Scribo Island group moved to this new location and other blacks from the United States joined them. The local tribes continually attacked the new colony, and in 1824, the settlers built fortifications for protection. In that same year, the settlement was named Liberia and its capital Monrovia, in honor of President James Monroe, who had procured more U.S. government money for the project. Other colonization societies sponsored by individual states purchased land and sent settlers to areas near Monrovia. Africans removed from slave ships by the U.S. Navy after the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade were also put ashore in Liberia. In 1838 most of these settlements, with up to 20,000 people, combined into one organization. The settlers attempted to retain the culture they had brought from the United States and for the most part did not integrate with the native societies. Today, about 5% of the population of Liberia is descended from these settlers. The U.S. government had provided Liberia some financial support, but Washington expected Monrovia to move towards self-sufficiency. Commerce was the first economic sector to grow in the colony. However, French and British traders continually encroached upon Liberian territory. As it was not a sovereign state, it was hard-pressed to defend its economic interests. The U.S. government lent some diplomatic support, but Britain and France had territories in West Africa and were better poised to act. As a result, in 1847, Liberia declared independence from the American Colonization Society in order to establish a sovereign state and create its own laws governing commerce. Despite protests by the affected British companies, London was the first to extend recognition to the new republic, signing a treaty of commerce and friendship with Monrovia in 1848. Because of fears of the impact this might have on the issue of slavery in the United States, Washington did not recognize the nation it had played a role in creating. In the meantime, a mass exodus of African Americans to Liberia never materialized. Though President Abraham Lincoln was open to promoting the idea, several abolitionists in his cabinet opposed it, some for moral considerations and others for the more practical reason of retaining sufficient labor and military forces for the future. the United States finally established diplomatic relations with Liberia in 1862, and continued to maintain strong ties until now. Liberia began to change during the 1970s. In 1971, William Tubman, Liberia's president of 27 years, died while in office. Tubman's open-door economic policy brought a great deal of foreign investment at heavy price, as the divide widened between the prospering Amerinco-Liberians, benefiting from such investment, and the rest of the population. Following Tubman's death, his long-serving vice president, William Tolbert, assumed the presidency. Because Tolbert was a member of one of the most influential and affluent Amerinco-Liberian families, everything from cabinet appointments to economic policy was tainted with allegations of nepotism. However, Tolbert was also the first president to speak an indigenous language, and he promoted a program to bring more indigenous persons into the government. Unfortunately, this initiative lacked support within Tolbert's own administration, and while the majority felt the change was occurring too slowly, many Amerinco-Liberians felt it was too rapid. In April 1979, a proposal to raise the price of rice, which the Tolbert administration subsidized, met with violent opposition. The government claimed that the price increase was meant to promote more local farming, slow the rate of urban migration, and reduce dependence on imported rice. However, opposition leaders also pointed out that the Tolbert family controlled the rice monopoly in Liberia and therefore stood to prosper. The ensuing rice riots severely damaged Tolbert's credibility and increased the administration's vulnerability. In April 1980, Army Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, an ethnic Kran, led a coup d'état that resulted in Tolbert's murder and the public execution of 13 of his cabinet members. Among the many Liberians that fled the country was then Minister of Finance, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. After the coup against President Tolbert's reign, the People's Redemption Council, PRC, headed by Samuel Doe, Army Master Sergeant, an ethnic Kran, assumed power and suspended the constitution. Doe lacked formal education. By many accounts he was illiterate at the time he took over the presidency. He also had no political or leadership experience. After only 1 year, Doe, concerned that his leadership was being threatened from within the PRC, executed his vice head of state and comrade in the 1980 coup, Thomas Wession, along with 4 other PRC members, claiming they had plotted against him. From this point on, Doe appeared increasingly paranoid regarding threats to his leadership and, as a result, his government became dominated by members of his own Kran ethnic group. Much of the population that initially supported the transition from Amerinco-Liberian rule became increasingly disenfranchised as the government returned to monopolized control. In November 1983, 3 of Doe's influential colleagues in the PRC left Liberia: Thomas Kwawankpa, commanding general of the Armed Forces of Liberia, Charles Taylor, head of the General Service Agency, and Prince Yormi Johnson, aide to Kwawankpa. All would eventually challenge Doe for control of the country. Facing increasing pressure from international organizations and donors, Doe lifted the ban on political parties and called for elections in 1985. The Liberian elections of October 1985 were problematic. Few international, or local, observers felt they were conducted fairly. However, the United States endorsed the results, although the current U.S. State Department position is that the elections were characterized by widespread fraud. In the end, Samuel Doe was named victor over his closest opponent, Jackson F. Doe. However, many believed, and still maintain, that Jackson F. Doe won the election. The following month, Samuel Doe's former second-in-command, Thomas Kwawankpa, entered Liberia through Sierra Leone and attempted to topple Doe through another coup. Kwawankpa failed, and his body was dragged through the streets of Monrovia. Doe's Grand-dominated government retaliated against the ethnic groups in Kwiwonkpa's native Nimba County, causing widespread loss of life within the Jayo and Mono communities. Even though elections were scheduled to take place in 1991, the growing abuse within Nimba County provided a fertile opportunity for Charles Taylor, related to Kwiwonkpa by marriage, and Prince Johnson, an ethnic Jayo, to begin planning to overthrow Doe. On December 24, 1989, Charles Taylor and a small group of Libyan-trained rebels entered Nimba County from neighboring Côte d'Ivoire. This group, the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL, initially encountered plenty of support within Nimba County, which endured the majority of Samuel Doe's wrath after the 1985 attempted coup. The Armed Forces of Liberia, AFL, launched counterattacks against Taylor's forces. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, peacekeeping force, ECOMOG, entered the conflict under the premise of a ceasefire and peace deal, albeit without the NPFL. The NPFL continued to make gains on the capital, Monrovia, and widespread atrocities were reported in Gran and Mandingo areas. The Mandingos were still largely victims of the NPFL onslaughts until 1991, when they, along with exiled Kran, organized the United Liberation Movement for Democracy in Liberia, ULMO. While reports vary, it appears that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was affiliated with Charles Taylor's movement. In July 1990, Prince Johnson split from Taylor and formed the Independent National Patriotic Front, INFL. The INFL and NPFL continued their siege on Monrovia, which the AFL defended. In September 1990, Doe visited the ECOMOG headquarters in Monrovia, where officials urged him to accept exile outside of Liberia. At the time, ECOMOG was barely established in the free port of Monrovia. At the port, Doe was captured and taken to the INFL's Caldwell base. The circumstances that led to Doe's visit to the free port are still unclear. However, after Doe arrived, Prince Johnson's INFL attacked the headquarters and captured, tortured, and killed him. Johnson's INFL and Taylor's NPFL continued to struggle for control of Monrovia in the months that followed. In November 1990, ECOWAS negotiated a settlement and established the Interim Government of National Unity, IGNU, led by Dr. Amos Sawyer, a former Dean of Political Science at the University of Liberia. However, Charles Taylor did not recognize the IGNU, and the fighting continued. The Kran and Mandingo groups, often targets of the NPFL, formed ULMO in 1991. In 1994 ULMO split into two factions, ULMO J, mostly Kran, led by Roosevelt Johnson, and ULMO K, mostly Mandingo, led by Alhaji Groma. Despite this agreement, fighting continued and 1996 saw some of the war's deadliest battles. However, in accordance with the timetable laid out in a supplement to the Accords, the Abuja Supplement, elections were conducted in July 1997 and Charles Taylor was declared winner, garnering nearly 75% of the vote. Some have speculated that Taylor won because many citizens believed that electing him was the only way to end the war. Peace in Liberia, if it ever really existed, was short-lived. By the late 1990s it was clear from reports that Taylor was supporting the Revolutionary United Front, RUF, in the civil war in neighboring Sierra Leone. As a result, the UN imposed sanctions on the Liberian government, including the following: an arms importation ban, a ban on foreign travel by high-ranking members of the government and their immediate families, a ban on trading blood diamonds. At the same time, there was a growing opposition movement to Taylor's government within Liberia, based largely in northern Lofa County. This opposition group, Liberians United for Reconciliation and Democracy, LURD, headed by Sekou Kone, a businessman married to the daughter of Guinean President Lansana Conté, began to engage in sporadic fighting with the AFL in 1999. By 2000, It was believed that LRD controlled nearly 80% of the countryside. Fighting between the government forces and LRD continued through 2002, but Taylor maintained control of Monrovia. Throughout the fighting, both the AFL and LRD were accused of widespread human rights violations against innocent civilians, as well as child soldier recruitment. In 2003, an offshoot of LRD, the Movement for Democracy in Liberia, MODEL, was formed in Côte d'Ivoire. MODEL was reported to have support in the southeastern counties of Grand Jeddah and Grand Cru. With fighting intensifying, Charles Taylor agreed to participate in an ECOWAS-sponsored peace summit in Ghana. In the hope that Taylor would be arrested by his Ghanaian hosts, the Office of the Prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone unsealed an indictment against him. Reportedly caught by surprise and unwilling to arrest Taylor, Ghana refused to detain him. Within hours, Taylor returned to Monrovia. In the following months, fighting intensified in and around Monrovia. Finally, in August 2003, Taylor accepted an ECOWAS-brokered peace deal that offered him asylum in Nigeria and proposed an ECOWAS Vanguard intervention force. Taylor's vice president, Moses Blah, finished the remaining term and was followed by a transition interim government headed by Liberian businessman Jude Bryant. In October 2003, the UN took over peacekeeping operations from ECOWAS and established the UN mission in Liberia, UNMIL. In the years that followed, active disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration and rebuilding efforts unfolded. Most local and international observers considered the Liberian elections in 2005 to be free and fair. The elections were for both parliamentary and presidential candidates. The presidential election took place in 2 rounds. The 2 first-round frontrunners, Liberian football star and former UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador George Weah and former World Bank official and economist Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, squared off for runoff elections in November. Johnson Sirleaf won and set off on a challenging reconstruction agenda. In March 2006, she surprised many by contradicting earlier statements and requesting that Charles Taylor be turned over to the Special Court for Sierra Leone. After some initial bungling, Nigeria handed over Taylor, who is currently being held in The Hague. His trial was conducted in April 2007. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf led the nation into reconstruction and established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, to help bring back the peace in Liberia. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf led the country for 12 years, 2 presidential terms, and a peaceful democratic transition was recorded into history on November 15, 2017 when President George M. Weah was elected into office. Since, the nation have maintained 16 years of peace and development as they battle against massive corruption in the government sector.